Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to a world where a good job might involve sifting through human waste or charming rats out of nobleman's pantry. Imagine cobblestone streets, the air thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, wood smoke, and something vaguely rotten, but also a bit earthy. You're there, surrounded by bustling markets, the clatter of artisans' hammers, and the distant, rhythmic thud of a public executioner work. It's a vibrant, dangerous, and utterly fascinating era, where innovation and squalor walked hand in hand. You might think your job is tough, but trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a single week in some of the roles we're about to explore. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now, down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself squinting in the perpetual gloom of a narrow, winding alleyway. The year is, say, 1480. The air is surprisingly crisp for all the smells, a testament to the fact that while people were often dirty, the open air did still circulate. You're not quite sure what you're doing here, but one thing is immediately clear. Finding a steady, safe gig is going to be a monumental task. This isn't your modern gig economy, where you can just hop online and sign up to deliver groceries. No, here, every opportunity feels like a desperate scramble, a race against hunger and the chill of a stone-floored hovel. Life expectancy, for starters, was laughably low by today's standards. If you made it to 40, you were practically ancient, a wise elder with creaking joints and a lifetime of hard knocks etched onto your face. Illnesses we cure with a quick pill today were death sentences. A simple cut could turn septic and carry you off in a matter of days. So, every job, no matter how humble, was a fight for survival, a way to keep that tenuous thread of life from snapping. Consider, for a moment, the gong farmer. No, that's not a person who cultivates musical instruments, although that sounds like a lovely, peaceful occupation. A gong farmer, my friend, was responsible for emptying latrine pits. Yes, you heard that right. Picture yourself under the cloak of darkness, because no one wanted to see or smell this job in broad daylight, descending into a stinking, reeking pit of human excrement. Armed with a shovel and a bucket, you'd scoop out the accumulated waste, sometimes for an entire night, hauling it away to be used as fertilizer or simply dumped into the nearest river. Talk about a job that really makes you appreciate indoor plumbing and modern sewage systems, right? It was a low-status job, certainly, but a necessary one. Someone had to do it, and these brave, or desperate, souls kept cities from literally drowning in their own waste. And the pay? Well, it wasn't terrible, given the unpleasantness. Enough to buy a meager meal, perhaps a bit of ale to dull the senses, and a small, uncomfortable bed in a shared room. A truly mainstream historical fact about the Renaissance is the explosion of urban centers, leading to unprecedented issues of waste management, making the gong farmer a vital, if malodorous, profession. Then there were the sin eaters. Now, this is where things get truly peculiar, a fringe tidbit that sounds straight out of a horror movie. In some parts of Renaissance Europe, particularly in rural areas, if someone died suddenly, it was believed their sins would linger with them, preventing their soul from resting peacefully. Enter the sin eater. This was typically a poor, marginalized individual who, for a small fee, often a few coins and a meal, would literally consume a piece of bread and a cup of ale placed on the deceased's chest. The belief was that by doing so, the sin eater would take on the sins of the dead person, allowing their soul to pass unburdened into the afterlife. Can you imagine showing up to a wake, not to mourn, but to perform this bizarre, spiritual transaction? It's a job that perfectly encapsulates the blend of superstition, poverty, and desperate measures that defined life for many. I bet they had some interesting dinner conversations. So, what did you eat today, dear? Any particularly spicy sins? Speaking of things you might ingest, let's talk about the town crier. Before newspapers were widespread, And long before the internet or even radio, how did people get their news? They heard it, shouted loud and clear by the town crier. You'd wander through crowded marketplaces, bellowing out royal proclamations, local ordinances, news of births, deaths, and marriages, and advertisements for goods and services. "Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes," they'd cry, attracting a crowd before delivering their often unwelcome news. This wasn't just a strong voice. It required a good memory, clear diction, and the ability to project over the din of a busy street. It was a job with some respect, but also one that made you the messenger, sometimes of bad tidings, making you occasionally unpopular with the crowd. Imagine trying to explain to someone, "No, I'm just telling you the king raised taxes again. Don't shoot the messenger." And for those who didn't quite make it into the more respectable, or even disgusting, trades, there was always the path of the resurrectionist, or as they were more charmingly known, body snatchers. With medical schools beginning to flourish in a desperate need for cadavers to study anatomy, but a severe shortage of legal means to acquire them, a macabre market emerged. Resurrectionists would stealthily dig up recently buried corpses from churchyards, often under the cover of darkness, and sell them to eager anatomists. It was highly illegal, incredibly dangerous, and ethically, well, let's just say it pushed some boundaries. But for a quick shilling, and if you had a strong stomach and even stronger nerves, it was a way to make a living. Just remember, if you ever wake up in the middle of the night feeling a bit chilly and notice the lid of your coffin is ajar, you might have just had a visit from a Renaissance professional. You also had the rat catcher. Cities were teeming with rats, spreading disease, and destroying food stores. So, someone had to deal with them. The rat catcher was a specialist, often seen with a bag of ferrets, a few traps, and a grim determination. They'd roam the grimy backstreets, rooting out nests, and presenting their gruesome trophies, piles of dead rats, for payment. It was a vital public health service, even if it wasn't particularly glamorous. And imagine the stories they could tell, if you could get past the smell. "Oh, the biggest one I caught. Yeah, it was practically the size of a small dog, and it looked at me with such judgment." Then there were the leech collectors. Before modern medicine, leeches were considered a miracle cure for everything from headaches to fevers, used to bleed patients and remove bad humors. So, someone had to gather them. This involved wading into murky ponds and streams, often letting the leeches attach themselves to your own legs to collect them. A sort of biological fishing, if you will, but with considerably more squirming and less delicious outcome. It sounds unpleasant, but it was a recognized, albeit niche, profession. And hey, at least you got free medical treatment on the job, right? Assuming you believed in leech therapy, that is. Even the simple act of lighting your home or city streets involved unusual jobs. The link boy was a common sight after dusk. Young boys, often poor and looking for a few coins, would carry a flaming torch or a link to guide pedestrians through the unlit, often dangerous streets of a city. They'd wait at taverns or busy intersections, offering their services to anyone brave enough to venture out after dark. It was a dangerous job. Flames, darkness, often rowdy patrons, and lurking criminals. But it was a way to earn a crust when other options were scarce. And I'm sure they had some stories to tell about who they saw sneaking around in the shadows. Probably a few too many tales involving cloaks and dag. RS, or cloaks and very little else, if you catch my drift. And if you were particularly strong and not squeamish, you might find work as a knocker-upper. While more associated with the Industrial Revolution, the precursors existed in the Renaissance for those who needed to be up before dawn for their labors. While not as formal, you'd find people tasked with waking up workers, banging on doors with a stick or throwing pebbles at windows. It was a human alarm clock, a loud and insistent presence in the quiet pre-dawn hours. Imagine your alarm clock not being your phone, but a grumpy person with a stick. Probably a lot harder to hit snooze. Finally, let's not forget the humble water carrier. Forget turning on a tap. Clean water was a luxury. In many cities, people relied on water carriers to bring fresh water from wells or rivers directly to their homes. These individuals would haul heavy buckets or barrels of water through the streets, often multiple times a day, providing a vital service for the populace. It was physically demanding work, paid by the bucket, and a testament to the sheer effort required for even the most basic necessities of life. Every drop was earned, often with a sore back and aching muscles. So, as you can see, the jobs of the Renaissance were often dirty, dangerous, and sometimes downright bizarre. They reveal a world utterly reliant on human labor, ingenuity, and a good deal of desperation. It was a time when survival meant embracing roles that would make most of us shudder today. Yet each one played a vital part in the sprawling, evolving tapestry of Renaissance society. And this is just the beginning. We've barely scratched the surface of the strange ways people earned their keep. You've navigated the challenging beginnings of Renaissance life, where every job was a fight for survival. Now the air, surprisingly, doesn't just carry the scent of humanity and horse dung. There's also the faint, metallic tang of, well, something medical. Because while getting sick today means a quick trip to the doctor and a prescription, in the Renaissance, illness was often a terrifying dance with death, and the healers were a motley, often bizarre crew. Forget white lab coats and sterile environments. Imagine a barber surgeon. This was a multi-talented individual who could give you a shave and a haircut, and then, without missing a beat, extract a tooth, set a broken bone, or even perform a rudimentary amputation. Their shops weren't just for grooming. They were often places of intense pain and desperation. You'd sit in a chair, probably a little wobbly, and watch as they sharpened their various gleaming and likely unsterilized tools. Bleeding was a common practice, believed to release bad humors from the body. So, you might pop in for a quick trim, and next thing you know, you're having leeches applied or a vein opened. It was a one-stop shop for hygiene and very rough and ready healthcare. A key mainstream historical fact is that surgery during the Renaissance was largely a craft, not a science, and often performed by those with practical skills rather than extensive medical theory, hence the rise of the barber surgeon. Then there were the alchemists. While often associated with the mythical quest to turn lead into gold, many alchemists were, in fact, the precursors to modern chemists and pharmacists. They experimented with various substances, seeking elixirs for eternal life or universal cures. You might visit an alchemist's cramped, fume-filled laboratory, hoping they could concoct a potion to cure your persistent cough or debilitating fever. They worked with strange ingredients: powdered unicorn horn, often just narwhal tusk, mandrake root, various animal parts, boiling, distilling, and mixing with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Some were charlatans, certainly, but others made genuine advancements in understanding chemical processes, even if their ultimate goals were fantastical. I bet their workshops smelled terrible, a mix of sulfur, herbs, and existential dread. Imagine asking, so, did you turn anything into gold today? Or just accidentally invent a new shade of green? For something truly quirky, consider the pestilence doctor, or plague doctor, as they're more famously known, though they truly came into their own during the later outbreaks beyond the early Renaissance. While the iconic bird-like mask is often associated with the 17th century, the concept of a dedicated physician for plague victims existed earlier. These doctors, often lacking formal medical training, would be hired by towns experiencing an outbreak. Their job was to treat the sick, compile public records of deaths, and sometimes even perform autopsies. The long, beaked mask, filled with aromatic herbs to ward off the miasma, bad air, believed to cause disease, was a later innovation, but the desperation that spawned such specialized, terrifying figures was already present. Imagine seeing that walking down your street. You'd probably immediately feel healthier, just out of sheer terror. And what about those who didn't trust the barber surgeon's bloody tools or the alchemist's mystical potions? They might turn to a wise woman or cunning man. These were local folk healers, often older women or men, who relied on traditional remedies, herbal knowledge, and sometimes a dash of superstition. They knew which plants cured which ailments, how to set a broken bone with splints and poultices, and could offer comfort and practical advice. They might interpret dreams, cast spells, for good luck, of course, or provide love potions, blurring the lines between medicine, magic, and community support. They were often the first, and sometimes only, recourse for the common people, embodying a kind of ancient, community-based healthcare system. And unlike the barber surgeon, they probably wouldn't leave a trail of blood on your floor. If you had a particularly stubborn ailment, or perhaps a toothache that was driving you absolutely mad, you might seek out a tooth puller. These specialists, often found at fairs or markets, were less about finesse and more about brute force. Armed with a variety of pliers and hooks, they'd often set up a public display, sometimes with a drum to drown out the screams. They'd extract teeth with remarkable speed, albeit with very little regard for pain management. You'd sit down, they'd yank, and moments later, you'd be spitting blood and feeling either immense relief or a new kind of agony. Dental hygiene was, let's just say, not a strong suit of the era, so these professionals were in high demand. Imagine the Yelp reviews. Fast service, but the waiting room music was terrible and the drilling felt aggressive. Then there were the empirics or quacks. These were the traveling salesmen of medicine, often with no formal training, hawking their miracle cures and panaceas in town squares. They'd set up elaborate stages, draw crowds with flashy performances, and sell bottles of snake oil that promised to cure everything from gout to baldness. While many were outright frauds, preying on the desperation of the sick, some might accidentally stumble upon a useful remedy, or at least a powerful placebo effect. You'd probably hear their booming voices from blocks away, promising eternal youth and the disappearance of all your woes, often delivered with a wink and a theatrical flourish. You had to have a healthy dose of skepticism in the Renaissance, especially when someone was promising you that their special blend of herbs and moonbeams would cure your existential dread. For those suffering from ailments believed to be spiritual rather than physical, there were the exorcists. While sanctioned by the church, the role of an exorcist was a specific and serious one, dealing with perceived demonic possession. This involved rituals, prayers, and sometimes rather dramatic confrontations with the afflicted. It wasn't a daily job for most, but a specialized calling for certain priests, often called upon in extreme cases where other explanations for bizarre behavior failed. It required immense faith, a strong will, and probably a very good lawyer, just in case things went south. And for the very wealthy, who could afford more nuanced care, there were the true physicians. These were the learned men, often university educated, who studied ancient texts, like those of Hippocrates and Galen, and understood the theories of humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They would diagnose by examining urine, blood, and pulse, and prescribe treatments often involving diet, rest, and herbal remedies, along with the aforementioned bleeding. While their understanding of the human body was limited by today's standards, they were the closest thing to modern doctors. They often wore long robes and carried a certain gravitas, projecting an air of authority and wisdom. You'd typically find them attending to the nobility or wealthy merchants, a stark contrast to the rough and ready barber surgeons serving the common folk. So, whether you needed a tooth pulled, a festering wound lanced, or a demonic spirit cast out, the Renaissance had a professional for you. These medical roles, while strange and sometimes terrifying by modern standards, reflect a society grappling with disease and mortality in ways we can barely imagine. They highlight a time when the line between science, superstition, and sheer desperation was incredibly thin, and finding a cure often involved as much faith as it did medicine. You'd certainly think twice about complaining about a long way to your doctor's office after a glimpse into Renaissance healthcare. Having explored the often unconventional world of Renaissance medicine, you might be ready for a change of pace. As you continue your wanderings through the bustling market square, the smells of the physician's concoctions begin to fade, replaced by the sweeter aroma of roasting meats, spiced wine, and something else, a sense of spectacle. Because while life in the Renaissance was often harsh, it also had its moments of levity, its ways of escaping the grim realities. And for that, you turn to the strange and wonderful world of entertainers and eccentrics. Imagine the jester, often called a fool. More than just a clown, the jester was a highly intelligent, sharp-witted individual, often the only person in a monarch's court who could get away with openly mocking the king or queen. They'd use satire, puns, and physical comedy to entertain, but also to deliver uncomfortable truths or political commentary under the guise of humor. It was a dangerous tightrope walk. One wrong joke could lead to disgrace or worse. But a good jester was a prized possession, a master of observation and wit who provided not just amusement, but also a unique form of social critique. A mainstream historical fact is that jesters often held significant influence in royal courts, acting as confidants and advisors, their humor a powerful tool. I bet they had to develop a really thick skin, or at least a good escape route, for those particularly edgy jokes. Then there were the minstrels and troubadours. These were the wandering musicians and poets, carrying news and stories from town to town. They'd sing ballads of chivalry and love, recite epic poems, and play instruments like lutes, harps, and flutes. They were the original rock stars, bringing entertainment to common folk and nobility alike, gathered around campfires or in banquet halls. They were the purveyors of culture, the guardians of oral traditions, and often the only link many people had to the wider world and its tales. You'd probably recognize them by the distinctive sounds of their instruments long before you saw them, a welcome melody cutting through the usual street noise. For a truly quirky spectacle, you might encounter a bear baiter or bull baiter. Now, this isn't for the faint of heart, and certainly not something we'd condone today. But in the Renaissance, it was a popular form of entertainment. A bear, often chained, would be pitted against a pack of dogs. It was a brutal, bloody sport that drew large crowds, showcasing a raw, untamed aspect of the era's leisure. While horrifying to modern sensibilities, these events were a common part of public life, reflecting a different set of values and a more visceral approach to entertainment. It's a stark reminder of how much public tastes have evolved, thankfully. Imagine explaining that to your therapist. And speaking of animals, what about the animal trainer? Beyond the bear baiting, there were trainers who taught animals to perform tricks for crowds. Monkeys dressed in tiny clothes, dogs walking on two legs, or even trained birds performing simple feats. These performers often traveled with circuses or fairs, captivating audiences with their unusual acts. It required immense patience and a deep understanding of animal behavior, combined with a healthy dose of showmanship. You'd see them in town squares, surrounded by wide-eyed children and adults alike, marveling at the intelligence of the creatures. The world of Renaissance entertainment also included the fire eater or sword swallower. These were the daredevils, the masters of illusion and physical prowess. They performed death-defying feats in front of gasping crowds, often at fairs or alongside traveling troops. The allure was the danger, the seeming impossibility of their acts. Imagine the collective intake of breath as someone slowly lowered a gleaming sword down their throat, or spat flames into the darkening sky. These were skills honed through countless hours of practice, pushing the boundaries of what the human body could endure, all for the roar of the crowd and a few scattered coins. Then you had the acrobats and tumblers, gravity-defying performers who would contort their bodies, balance on precarious structures, or perform incredible leaps and tumbles. They would entertain in market squares, at noble feasts, or as part of larger traveling shows. Their agility and strength were admired, and their performances provided a thrilling escape from the mundane. They were the athletes of the entertainment world, demonstrating physical mastery and precision, often without the safety nets we'd expect today. One wrong step, and your career, and possibly your life, were over. Talk about high stakes. For something a little more cerebral, there were the storytellers and orators. In an age before widespread literacy, the spoken word was king. These individuals would captivate audiences with tales of heroism, romance, and adventure, sometimes even performing entire plays by themselves, taking on multiple voices and characters. They might also deliver powerful speeches or sermons, swaying public opinion with their eloquence. Their power lay in their voice, their memory, and their ability to weave narratives that transported listeners to other worlds, proving that a good story is truly timeless. And what about those who were the spectacle? The human curiosities or freak show performers? While a regrettable chapter in history, individuals with unusual physical conditions, extreme height or shortness, unusual birthmarks, or rare conditions, were often exhibited for public viewing. They might travel with fairs, charging a small fee for people to gaze upon them. It was a complex existence for these individuals, often marginalized, but also able to earn a living through their unique appearance. It speaks to a time when differences were often seen as oddities to be displayed rather than conditions to be understood or integrated. Finally, for the religious festivals and celebrations, you had the mystery play performers. These were amateur actors, often members of guilds, who would put on elaborate theatrical productions based on biblical stories. These plays were a mix of religious instruction and vibrant entertainment, often featuring elaborate costumes, special effects, and even comedic elements. They were performed in town squares, drawing huge crowds and providing a collective, communal experience that blended faith with theatrical spectacle. Imagine a medieval version of a grand outdoor play, complete with angels flying from church steeples and devils popping up from trapdoors. So, from the sharp wit of the jester to the dangerous feats of the fire eater and the brutal spectacle of animal baiting, the Renaissance offered a truly diverse and often peculiar range of entertainment. It reflected a society that valued spectacle, celebrated physical prowess, and found ways to laugh, gasp, and even be shocked, even amidst the everyday struggles. And for those who provided the entertainment, it was a way to carve out a living, however unconventional, in a world where every penny counted. You've seen the jesters, heard the minstrels, and perhaps wisely avoided the bear-baiting pit. Now, as you navigate the narrow lanes, you start to notice a different kind of industry at work. The Renaissance wasn't just about grand art and philosophy. It was also a world built by intricate crafts and specialized skills, often requiring a touch of the bizarre. Many of these artisans held jobs that sound utterly alien to our modern ears, yet they were crucial cogs in the elaborate machinery of daily life. Consider the goldsmith. Now, you might think of them as straightforward jewelers, but in the Renaissance, their role was far more expansive. Beyond crafting exquisite jewelry and ornate religious artifacts, goldsmiths were often trusted financial advisors, assayers, testing the purity of metals, and even moneylenders. Their skills with precious metals made them intimately familiar with wealth, and their workshops were often places where important financial transactions took place. It was a position of immense trust and skill, combining artistry with a keen business acumen. A mainstream historical fact is that goldsmiths often acted as early bankers, holding deposits and facilitating exchanges, laying groundwork for modern financial systems. Imagine dropping off your engagement ring for resizing and accidentally getting a lecture on market trends. For something truly quirky, let's talk about the court dwarf. While some individuals with dwarfism held positions as jesters, others were valued for their unique perspective and often sharp wit, serving as companions, confidants, and even advisors to royalty and nobility. They were often highly educated and intelligent, challenging societal norms and providing a different kind of insight to their patrons. It's a job that reflects a complex mix of curiosity, entertainment, and genuine affection, albeit through a lens of difference. Their role was less about physical labor and more about intellectual companionship, often making them privy to secrets and gossip that even the highest-ranking nobles wouldn't hear. I bet they had the best stories, if only you could get them to spill the beans. Then there was the master of the hunt. This wasn't just someone who enjoyed a good chase. This was a highly skilled professional responsible for managing the entire hunting retinue of a noble household. This included breeding and training hunting dogs, like greyhounds and mastiffs, managing stables of horses, and understanding the habits of game animals. They were experts in tracking, horsemanship, and the elaborate etiquette of the hunt, which was as much a social event as it was a practical one for procuring food. It was a demanding job, requiring both practical outdoorsmanship and organizational prowess. Imagine coordinating dozens of hounds, horses, and boisterous nobles all at once. It sounds like herding cats, but with more antlers. Speaking of animals, you also had the falconer. Falconry was a highly prestigious sport and a practical means of hunting for the nobility. The falconer was an expert in training and caring for birds of prey, falcons, hawks, and even eagles. They understood the intricate art of conditioning these magnificent birds, teaching them to hunt prey and return to the hand. This required immense patience, a deep knowledge of avian behavior, and a very strong glove. A well-trained falcon was incredibly valuable, a symbol of status and a testament to the falconer's skill. And let's be honest, walking around with a majestic bird of prey on your arm probably made you feel pretty cool. For the really dirty work, there were the tanners. Leather was an incredibly important material in the Renaissance, used for everything from shoes and clothing to armor and bookbindings. Tanners were responsible for turning raw animal hides into usable leather. This was a notoriously foul-smelling job, as it involved soaking hides in vats of urine, lime, and other caustic and pungent chemicals to remove hair and flesh, and then softening them. The tanneries were usually located on the outskirts of towns, downwind, for very good reason. It was a physically demanding and unpleasant profession, but absolutely essential for daily life. You'd probably smell a tanner before you saw them, a powerful aroma clinging to their clothes and skin. And for those who dealt in finer materials, there was the dyer. Clothing wasn't just brown or gray. The Renaissance was an explosion of color, and the dyers were the artists behind it. They extracted pigments from plants, insects, like cochineal, which gives a vibrant red, and minerals, then meticulously applied them to fabrics. It was a highly skilled craft, as different dyes reacted differently with various fibers, and achieving consistent, vibrant colors required precision and experience. Imagine the trial and error, the accidental purple fingers, and the sheer satisfaction of creating a stunning crimson velvet. In the realm of construction, beyond the stonemasons and carpenters, you had the wattle and daw builder. For more modest homes and structures, this was a common technique. Wattle and daw builders would create a lattice of woven wooden strips, wattle, and then cover it with a sticky mixture of mud, clay, straw, and sometimes animal dung daub. It was a highly effective, if somewhat rustic, method of construction, creating insulated and surprisingly sturdy walls. It was a dirty, hands-on job, mixing earth and straw with your bare feet, but it allowed for quick and relatively cheap construction. You could probably smell the freshness of the damp earth as they worked. Finally, consider the paper maker. Before the printing press truly took off, paper was still a valuable commodity, painstakingly made by hand. Paper makers would collect rags. Linen and cotton were preferred. Boil them down, beat them into a pulp, and then spread this pulp onto screens to dry into sheets. It was a labor-intensive process, requiring skill and a good eye to produce consistent, high-quality paper. The widespread availability of paper was a quiet revolution, paving the way for the dissemination of knowledge and the growth of literacy. Without these unsung heroes, the Renaissance would have been a much quieter, less documented affair. And imagine the satisfaction of knowing that your work was literally the foundation for future masterpieces and grand ideas. These artisans, from the precise goldsmith to the malodorous tanner, each played a unique and indispensable role in the complex tapestry of Renaissance life. Their crafts, often passed down through generations, reveal a world where every object, every service, was the result of dedicated human labor and specialized skill, often in conditions that would make us question our life choices today. You've had a whirlwind tour through the workshops and courts of Renaissance artisans, and perhaps you're now acutely aware of how much human effort went into every object. But as you continue your stroll through these historical streets, you're hit with another unavoidable reality: the distinct smell of the past. Because while we've talked about jobs, we need to address something fundamental to daily life: hygiene, or rather, the glorious, often gross, and sometimes bizarre attempts at it during the Renaissance. Imagine the groom of the stool. Yes, you heard that right. This was a highly privileged and incredibly intimate position in royal courts. This individual's job was quite literally to assist the monarch with their toileting needs. Beyond the obvious, the groom of the stool was often privy to the most private moments and thoughts of the king or queen, becoming a trusted confidant and advisor. They managed the royal chamber pot, ensured its cleanliness, and sometimes even oversaw the monarch's diet to ensure regularity. It was a job that combined the most menial of tasks with the highest levels of access and trust, embodying a bizarre blend of servitude and power. A mainstream historical fact is that this position, despite its seemingly humble nature, granted the holder immense influence and power, often leading to significant political careers. You'd think they'd at least get hazard pay, right? And probably a very strong sense of smell. For something truly quirky, let's look at the general attitude towards bathing. For much of the Renaissance, public bathhouses, common in Roman times, declined, partly due to fears of disease transmission, though they didn't quite understand how disease spread, and partly due to changing social norms. Many people believe that water opened pores, allowing illness to enter the body. So, instead of full immersion bathing, people often resorted to dry, cleaning methods. You might encounter a laundress who specialized in cleaning clothes, but personal hygiene involved a lot of wiping down with linen cloths, liberal application of perfumes, and changing clothes frequently. The idea was to keep clean by wearing fresh linen, which absorbs sweat and oils, rather than by scrubbing with water. It's why linen was so crucial. So, while you might not find a professional bather, the laundress was doing essential work in managing what little personal cleanliness was practiced. Speaking of perfumes, you had the perfumer. With bathing being a rare luxury for many, and the pervasive smells of city life, perfumes were incredibly important for masking odors. Perfumers would create elaborate scents from flowers, herbs, and animal musk. These weren't just simple sprays. They were often complex concoctions designed to be powerful and long-lasting, covering up the less desirable natural aromas of the human body and the environment. It was a delicate art, balancing various fragrant ingredients to create something appealing. Imagine trying to create a delightful rose scent when your primary inspiration is a street full of unemptied chamber pots. Talk about a challenge. Then there were the muckrakers or scavengers. These were the unsung heroes of public sanitation, to a degree. In cities without organized waste collection, these individuals would often roam the streets, collecting refuse, animal carcasses, and anything else that could be reused, sold, or simply removed. They were effectively the waste disposal system, preventing cities from becoming completely impassable. It was a dirty, thankless job, but a vital one for keeping some semblance of order and preventing the spread of vermin. You might see them pushing crude hand carts, picking through piles of discarded goods, often accompanied by a cloud of flies. They probably developed a very strong immune system, or at least a very strong stomach. And what about the constant battle against pests? You had the vermin controller. While we've mentioned rat catchers, this job extended to dealing with fleas, lice, and other unpleasant creatures that were an unavoidable part of life. People living in close quarters with poor hygiene often suffered from infestations. While some remedies were herbal, others were more direct. This could involve using early insecticides, creating traps, or even simply teaching people how to thoroughly clean their bedding and clothing, or having the laundress do it. It was an endless war against tiny invaders, and the vermin controller was on the front lines, fighting battles that were literally skin deep. For those who lived in larger houses or palaces, there was often a dedicated chamberlain or a specific servant whose duties included managing chamber pots and ensuring cleanliness within private quarters. While not as high-ranking as the groom of the stool, These individuals were responsible for the daily disposal of human waste from the house, carrying the pots to designated dumping areas or directly to the gong farmers' pits. It was a discreet but essential task, maintaining a degree of comfort and cleanliness for the household members. You wouldn't want to mess up with the person responsible for your nighttime emergencies, would you? And speaking of public facilities, or the lack thereof, consider the general approach to public urination and defecation. It was common practice for people to simply relieve themselves wherever convenient, in alleyways, against walls, or into gutters. While not a formal job, the sheer volume of personal deposits meant that there were often informal street sweepers or gutter cleaners who would regularly clear away the worst of the accumulated filth, pushing it into larger piles to be collected by scavengers or washed away by rain. It was a constant, losing battle against the tide of human waste, but one that someone had to wage, even if informally. Even the simple act of maintaining a fireplace or hearth involved a certain kind of cleanliness. The chimney sweep, while perhaps more associated with later periods, had their origins in the Renaissance as hearths and chimneys became more common. Their job was to climb into narrow, sooty flues, scraping away the dangerous buildup of soot and creosote to prevent chimney fires. It was a filthy, claustrophobic, and dangerous job, but essential for safety and efficiency. They were literally immersed in the dirt of the household, emerging black from head to toe. Probably not the best person to invite over for a clean linen-only dinner party. So, from the high-ranking groom of the stool to the lowliest street scavenger, the jobs associated with hygiene in the Renaissance were a testament to the raw, unfiltered reality of daily life. They remind us that while the era birthed incredible art and science, it was also a time of pervasive smells, ever-present pests, and often very imaginative, if sometimes disgusting, solutions to the eternal problem of keeping things relatively clean. It makes you really appreciate your morning shower, doesn't it? And perhaps that subtle scent of soap. You've navigated the fragrant, or perhaps not so fragrant, world of Renaissance hygiene. And now, as you turn a corner, the sounds change again. The bustling market recedes, and in its place, you hear the distant, ominous clanging of a bell, perhaps the murmur of a crowd, and a pervasive sense of gravity. Because in a world where survival was a daily struggle, upholding order and dispensing justice, or what passed for it, involved a series of grim, public, and often utterly bizarre jobs. Imagine the executioner. This was the ultimate enforcer of justice, or rather, punishment. Often clad in black and masked, the executioner was responsible for carrying out sentences ranging from public floggings and mutilations to hangings, beheadings, and even burning at the stake. Their work was public spectacle, designed to deter crime and assert the authority of the state or church. It was a highly specialized, if morbid, skill that required precision and a steady hand. Despite their crucial role in society, executioners were often ostracized, living on the fringes, feared and reviled by the very people they served. A mainstream historical fact is that public executions were common throughout the Renaissance, serving as both punishment and a form of public theater, designed to instill fear and respect for authority. I bet they never had trouble getting a seat on the bus though, right? Or rather, a clear path through the market. For something truly quirky, let's talk about the coroner's assistant, or perhaps even the rudimentary crime scene cleaner. While not as formalized as today, when a sudden or suspicious death occurred, someone had to deal with the aftermath. This might involve a local official, but also the less savory task of removing the body, cleaning the site, often just with water and sand, and preparing the deceased for whatever rudimentary post-mortem examination might be conducted by a barber surgeon or physician. It was a hands-on job with very little in the way of protective gear, requiring a strong stomach and a profound indifference to the morbid. You can imagine the tales they might accumulate, the silent witnesses to the darker side of human nature. Then there was the torturer. While the executioner dealt with the final punishment, the torturer's role was to extract confessions or information, often at the behest of legal or religious authorities. They employed a wide array of gruesome instruments designed to inflict maximum pain without necessarily causing immediate death. The rack, thumbscrews, water torture, these were their tools of the trade. Like the executioner, the torturer was a pariah, isolated by their profession, but their skills were undeniably sought after by those in power. It's a chilling reminder of the brutal methods used to enforce order and conformity in a world without modern forensic science or human rights conventions. On the other side of the legal spectrum, you had the bailiff or constable. These were the local law enforcement officers, responsible for maintaining peace, arresting offenders, and serving warrants. They were the visible arm of the law, patrolling streets, breaking up fights, and bringing suspects before the magistrates. Their job was often dangerous, dealing with unruly crowds, desperate criminals, and sometimes corrupt officials. They had to be brave, resilient, and possess a good understanding of local customs and laws, even if those laws often seemed arbitrary by today's standards. They were the ones you hoped to see when trouble arose, and the ones you hoped not to see if you were up to no good. For those who ended up on the wrong side of the law, and particularly those sentenced to public shaming, there was the public whipper or brandisher. Lesser punishments often involved public humiliation, like being placed in the stocks or pillory, or being publicly whipped. This job involved administering these physical punishments, often with a whip or cane, as a deterrent and a spectacle. It was a job that required a certain detachment and the ability to ignore the pleas and screams of the condemned, all performed in front of a jeering or solemn crowd. A grim but regular feature of town life. And what about the grim art of identifying the deceased, especially when they weren't known? The body viewer was someone responsible for examining corpses, often for signs of violence or disease, and attempting to identify them. With no fingerprinting or DNA analysis, this relied on recognizing faces, clothing, or unique marks. It was a job for someone with a sharp eye, a good memory, and an ability to stomach the sight of death, often in its less pleasant forms. They were the early detectives, piecing together fragments of identity for the quiet stillness of death. For those who handled the evidence, such as it was, you might find an early version of a document forger spotter. With the rise of commerce and legal contracts, the ability to authenticate documents became crucial. While not a formal job title, certain scribes or legal clerks would develop specialized skills in identifying forged seals, manipulated handwriting, or altered parchment. Their expertise was vital in preventing fraud and upholding the integrity of legal proceedings, a meticulous battle against deception. Imagine staring at countless identical-looking documents, trying to spot the one tiny difference that gives away a forgery. That's dedication. In the prisons, or dungeons as they were often called, you would find a jailer or jailer. Their job was to guard prisoners, maintain order, such as it was, and often provide food and water. Prisons were not designed for rehabilitation, but for holding individuals until trial or punishment, and conditions were often squalid and brutal. A jailer had immense power over their charges, and their reputation could range from reasonably humane to utterly cruel. It was a dark, isolated profession, dealing with the dregs of society and often succumbing to the harshness of their environment themselves. And finally, for the unfortunate souls who faced justice, there was the public apologist, or someone coerced into making a public confession. While not a formal job per se, the act of publicly confessing one's sins or crimes, often on a scaffold or in a church, was a forced performance designed to legitimize the authorities and serve as a moral lesson. The individual was effectively performing a job for the state, acting as a living example of the consequences of transgressions. It was a profound and deeply humiliating act, stripped bare before the community. So, from the fearsome executioner to the watchful bailiff and the often unseen torturer, the jobs associated with crime, punishment, and justice in the Renaissance were a stark reflection of a society grappling with order in a brutal age. They highlight a time when law was often dispensed publicly and painfully, Serving is a visceral reminder that the consequences of transgressing societal norms were often immediate and severe. It makes you appreciate the concept of due process just a little bit more, doesn't it? You've traversed the unsettling landscape of Renaissance justice, perhaps feeling a shiver down your spine at the thought of the executioner's block. Now, let's turn our attention to something a bit more palatable, or at least something that kept everyone alive: food. But even the simple act of eating involved a surprising array of jobs, some of them rather bizarre, that kept the tables of nobility and the meager plates of commoners supplied. Imagine the master cook in a grand, noble household. This wasn't just someone who could whip up a good meal. This was an artist, a chemist, and a logistical genius. They were responsible for planning elaborate banquets, sourcing exotic ingredients, often from far-flung lands, managing a team of scullery maids and kitchen boys, and ensuring that every dish was not only delicious but also a visual spectacle. Think roasted peacocks redressed in their feathers, sugar sculptures, and elaborate pies. It was a high-pressure job, where a single culinary mistake could lead to royal displeasure, or worse. A mainstream historical fact is that Renaissance banquets were elaborate displays of wealth and power, and the master cook was central to this theatrical presentation, often seen as an extension of the host's prestige. I bet they had a temper, too, when their souffle didn't rise. For something truly quirky, let's consider the taster. Yes, exactly what it sounds like. In an age rife with political intrigue and the ever-present threat of poisoning, monarchs and high-ranking nobles often employed a dedicated food taster. This individual's job was to sample every dish and drink before it was served to their patron, literally putting their life on the line with every meal. It required an iron stomach, a keen sense of observation, and perhaps a very good relationship with the local barber surgeon. Imagine going to work every day knowing that any given mouthful could be your last. Talk about a job with high stakes. Is this soup delicious? Or is it going to be my final act? Then there was the butcher. Before refrigeration, getting fresh meat meant constant, immediate slaughter. The butcher was a skilled professional, responsible for butchering animals, pigs, cows, sheep, and preparing cuts of meat for sale or consumption. It was a messy, physical job, requiring strength, precision with knives, and a strong constitution. Butcher shops were often bustling, bloody places, the air thick with the smell of fresh meat and sawdust. They were essential to the urban diet, providing a vital source of protein, even if their methods were a bit rustic by modern standards. For those who dealt with less glamorous foodstuffs, there was the gleaner. This wasn't a formal job, but a vital role for the very poor. After the harvest, gleaners, often women and children, would be allowed onto the fields to collect any leftover grains or produce that the reapers had missed. It was a back-breaking, often competitive activity, but it could mean the difference between starvation and survival for many families. It was a testament to the frugality and resourcefulness required in a world where every single scrap of food mattered. And what about keeping food fresh in an age without refrigerators? Enter the ice cutter or ice house manager. In colder regions, during winter, ice would be harvested from frozen lakes or rivers and stored in insulated ice houses, often underground. These individuals would be responsible for the dangerous work of cutting large blocks of ice and carefully storing them for use throughout the warmer months. This ice would then be used to preserve food for noble households or for cooling drinks. It was a highly specialized, seasonal, and often perilous job, navigating treacherous ice and freezing temperatures, all to keep that noble's wine perfectly chilled. Consider also the baker. While seemingly straightforward, the baker was a linchpin of the community. Bread was the staple of the Renaissance diet, from coarse dark loaves for the poor to finer white breads for the wealthy. Bakers worked long, hot hours, kneading dough, tending wood-fired ovens, and ensuring a constant supply of this essential foodstuff. They often had a special status within the community, their ovens serving as a vital resource. And let's be honest, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the streets, must have been one of the few truly delightful aromas. For those with a sweet tooth and the means to indulge it, there was the confectioner. Sugar was still a luxury, imported from distant lands, but it was used to create elaborate sweet treats for banquets and special occasions. Confectioners would craft intricate sugar sculptures, candied fruits, marzipan figures, and other sugary delights. It was a highly artistic and precise job, requiring patience and a steady hand, transforming a precious ingredient into fleeting works of edible art. Imagine spending days perfecting a sugar castle, knowing it would be demolished in minutes. And if you were particularly skilled with a needle and thread, you might find work as a food net weaver. In an age before cling film and airtight containers, keeping flies and other insects off food, especially at large banquets, was a constant battle. Fine mesh nets, often intricately woven, would be placed over dishes. This seemingly minor job was important for both hygiene, such as it was, and presentation, ensuring that the elaborate food displays remained appealing and untainted. A meticulous, unseen art form, often overlooked in the grand scheme of things. Finally, for the less fortunate, or those who simply needed a quick bite, there were the street vendors selling prepared foods. Imagine the aroma of roasting chestnuts, savory pies, or fresh fish sizzling over an open fire. These vendors, often calling out their wares, provided accessible, ready-to-eat meals for laborers, travelers, and anyone without a kitchen of their own. It was a tough, competitive livelihood, requiring a loud voice, a compelling product, and the ability to cook on the go. They were the original fast food industry, providing sustenance one savory, or sweet, morsel at a time. From the opulent kitchens of the aristocracy to the simple bread oven of the local baker, the jobs associated with food in the Renaissance were as diverse as the diets themselves. They reveal a world where every meal, whether a lavish feast or a humble crust of bread, was the result of a chain of specialized labor, much of it physically demanding, often dangerous, and sometimes truly bizarre. It makes you appreciate that quick trip to the grocery store, doesn't it? You've indulged in the culinary delights, and perhaps some of the less delightful realities, of Renaissance food preparation. Now, as the last crumbs of a theoretical spiced bun vanish, let's step outside the city gates, or perhaps onto a bustling dock, because the Renaissance was an era of burgeoning trade, exploration, and movement, and with that came a whole new set of professions dedicated to travel and, often, a fair bit of trouble. Imagine the navigator or cartographer. As ships ventured further across unknown oceans, the need for accurate maps and skilled navigators became paramount. These were individuals who understood celestial navigation, could calculate longitude and latitude, or at least approximate it, and meticulously charted new coastlines and trade routes. Their work was dangerous, relying on fragile instruments and often unreliable information, but it was absolutely vital for the expansion of global trade and the very definition of the known world. A mainstream historical fact is that the advancements in cartography during the Renaissance, driven by exploration, radically reshaped humanity's understanding of the world. They were the original GPS, but with more stars and considerably more risk. I bet they had some truly epic sea shanties about getting lost. For something truly quirky, consider the spice smuggler. While legitimate trade routes for valuable commodities like spices, silks, and dyes were flourishing, so too was the illicit trade. High tariffs and monopolies meant that there was immense profit to be made by circumventing official channels. Spice smugglers would use hidden compartments in ships, secret overland routes, and ingenious disguises to bring these highly sought-after goods to market, avoiding duties and enriching themselves. It was a high-risk, high-reward profession, requiring cunning, bravery, and a network of equally shady contacts. Imagine the tension of a customs inspection, knowing you've got a secret stash of nutmeg worth a king's ransom hidden in your ship's bilge. Then there were the sailors themselves. Life at sea during the Renaissance was incredibly harsh. Sailors faced cramped quarters, poor food, disease, like scurvy, and the constant threat of storms, piracy, and shipwreck. They were skilled in rigging, knot tying, and managing sails, enduring weeks or months at sea with little comfort. Whether on merchant vessels or warships, they were the backbone of global trade and exploration, enduring unimaginable hardships for meager pay. Their hands were probably perpetually calloused, and their stories of the open sea would make for quite the campfire tale. Speaking of dangers at sea, you also had the pirate. While certainly not a legitimate profession, piracy flourished during the Renaissance, particularly as global trade expanded and vulnerable merchant ships became rich targets. Pirates were often ex-sailors, disgruntled privateers, or simply desperate individuals who chose a life of plunder over poverty. They raided ships, stole cargo, and sometimes held passengers for ransom. Their lives were short and brutal, ending either by the hangman's noose or in a violent confrontation. But for some, the lure of quick riches and a life outside societal norms was too strong to resist. Imagine the ultimate freedom, but with a plank constantly looming in your future. For those who stayed on land but still dealt with movement of goods, there was the wagoner or teamster. These individuals drove horse-drawn wagons, transporting goods between towns and cities, often over unpaved, dangerous roads. They faced the constant threat of bad weather, highwaymen, and mechanical breakdowns. It was a slow, arduous job, requiring strength to handle the animals, knowledge of the terrain, and the ability to defend their cargo if necessary. Their journeys were long, often punctuated by stays in rough inns, and they were the vital link in the overland supply chain. And for the very real threat on those roads, you had the highwayman or brigand. These were the land-based equivalents of pirates, ambushing travelers and merchants on isolated roads. They often worked in small gangs, using surprise and force to rob unsuspecting victims. While romanticized in later periods, the reality was often brutal and desperate. Like pirates, their careers were generally short-lived, ending either in capture and execution or by falling victim to their own violent profession. You certainly hoped you wouldn't run into one of them on your journey. In cities, for those who helped people navigate the streets, there was the informal role of the guide or porter. With cities often labyrinthine and signage scarce, someone familiar with the layout could earn a few coins guiding strangers to their destination. Porters, on the other hand, would carry luggage or goods for travelers, often struggling under immense loads through crowded thoroughfares. These were essential services, particularly for visitors to a new city, making navigation and transport just a little bit easier. And for a quirky role to help facilitate travel, consider the stable boy or groom. While seeming humble, these individuals were vital to the smooth running of any journey involving horses. They fed, watered, and groomed the horses, maintained the stables, and ensured that the animals were fit for travel. Without healthy, well-cared-for horses, overland travel would have ground to a halt. It was physically demanding and dirty work, but essential for the mobility of people and goods. They knew every horse's personality, and probably had a few choice words for particularly stubborn ones. Finally, for those who profited directly from travel, there were the innkeepers. Running an inn was more than just providing a bed and a meal. Innkeepers were often the hub of local information, hearing tales from travelers, news from distant lands, and local gossip. They provided respite for weary travelers, a place to rest, eat, and refresh before continuing their arduous journeys. It was a demanding business, dealing with a diverse clientele, managing staff, and often facing the challenges of providing comfort in an age of scarce resources. They were the unsung heroes of Renaissance travel, providing a crucial network of safe havens along dangerous routes. From the adventurous navigators charting new worlds to the desperate highwaymen preying on travelers, the jobs associated with travel and trouble during the Renaissance paint a vivid picture of an era defined by movement, risk, and a constant push for new horizons. It makes a long flight feel a lot less daunting, doesn't it? Knowing you're not going to be boarded by pirates mid-air. You've traversed the treacherous roads and high seas of Renaissance travel, dodged imaginary highwaymen, and perhaps even considered a brief career as a spice smuggler. Now, let's settle down, perhaps by the flickering light of a single candle, and delve into a quieter but equally profound world, the realm of words, knowledge, and the dawning age of widespread literacy. Because the Renaissance wasn't just about discovery and grand art. It was also a revolution of information, fueled by some fascinating and often meticulous professions. Imagine the scribe or illuminator. Before the printing press, every book, every document, every legal contract was painstakingly copied by hand. Scribes, often monks or educated clerks, would spend countless hours meticulously writing out texts, ensuring accuracy. Illuminators, on the other hand, were artists who adorned these texts with intricate drawings, gilded initials, and vibrant miniature paintings, turning manuscripts into breathtaking works of art. Their work was slow, precise, and highly skilled, making each book a unique, valuable treasure. A mainstream historical fact is that monastic scriptoria were crucial centers of learning and book production, preserving ancient texts through centuries of hand copying. I bet they had excellent penmanship and probably a perpetually aching back. Just one more page, just one more tiny, intricate flower. For something truly quirky, consider the public reader. In an era where literacy was not universal, especially among the common folk, how did people access stories, news, or even religious texts? They listened. Public readers, often found in taverns, market squares, or even in wealthy households, would read aloud from books, pamphlets, or broadsides. They were the original audiobooks, bringing the written word to life for those who couldn't read themselves. It required a strong, clear voice, good diction, and the ability to engage an audience, turning a simple text into a captivating performance. Imagine getting your daily news by gathering around someone who's dramatically intoning the latest royal decree. Then there was the printer and typesetter. The invention of the movable type printing press by Gutenberg revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge. Printers and typesetters were the pioneers of this new technology. Typesetters meticulously arranged individual metal letters into words, lines, and pages, ensuring correct spacing and alignment. Printers then operated the presses, inking the type and pressing it onto paper. It was a physically demanding and precise job, but it democratized knowledge, making books far more accessible and affordable. This was the quiet revolution that echoed throughout the Renaissance and beyond, permanently changing the landscape of education and information. Speaking of information, you had the librarian, though perhaps not in the modern sense of a quiet, organized public library. Libraries in the Renaissance were often private collections of wealthy individuals, monasteries, or universities. The librarian's job was to carefully catalog, preserve, and often chain these precious manuscripts and early printed books. They were guardians of knowledge, responsible for protecting these valuable resources from theft, damage, or even censorship. It required a deep respect for learning and an understanding of how to care for fragile, ancient texts. They probably had a very intense system for overdue books. For those who crafted the language itself, there were the lexicographers and grammarians. As languages like English, French, and German began to standardize, individuals dedicated themselves to compiling dictionaries and writing grammar rules. Their painstaking work helped to define the structure and vocabulary of languages, making written and spoken communication more consistent. It was a meticulous, scholarly pursuit, often debated vigorously among academics, but laid the groundwork for modern linguistic studies. Imagine arguing over whether ain't should be in the dictionary. And what about those who collected more than just words? The collector of curiosities or cabinet of wonders curator. Wealthy individuals in the Renaissance often amassed vast collections of unusual objects, exotic artifacts from newly discovered lands, rare natural specimens, ancient coins, or strange mechanical devices. These collections, known as cabinets of curiosities or Wonder Cameron, were precursors to modern museums. The curator's job was to acquire, arrange, and display these objects, often creating theatrical presentations to impress visitors and demonstrate the owner's knowledge and wealth. It was a blend of scholarship, aesthetic arrangement, and a good bit of showmanship. For those who capture the spoken word, there were the informal chroniclers or recorders of oral history. While scribes copied official documents, many individuals, often in rural communities, played a role in remembering and transmitting local histories, genealogies, and folk tales. They were the living archives, passing down stories from generation to generation, ensuring that local knowledge and traditions were not lost. It wasn't a paid job, but a vital community role, relying on exceptional memory and storytelling ability. And in the growing universities, you would find the copyist of lecture notes. While students might take their own notes for particularly important or complex lectures, or for students who could afford it, there might be individuals hired to meticulously copy down the professor's every word. This ensured that accurate records of scholarly discourse were preserved and disseminated. It required speed, accuracy, and the ability to understand complex academic subjects on the fly, a sort of medieval stenographer. Finally, consider the ballad seller. While minstrels sang their ballads, the advent of cheap printing meant that popular songs, poems, and news stories could be printed on single sheets of paper, broadsides, and sold for a penny. Ballad sellers would hawk these sheets on street corners, often singing the ballads themselves to entice buyers. They were the popular press of the day, disseminating both entertainment and information to the masses in an easily consumable format. It was a lively, often boisterous profession, bringing the latest rhymes and news directly to the people. From the silent, dedicated scribes to the booming voices of public readers, and the industrious clatter of the printing press, the world of words and lore in the Renaissance was undergoing a profound transformation. These jobs, whether ancient or newly emerging, were instrumental in spreading knowledge, preserving culture, and shaping the very intellectual fabric of the age. It makes you realize how much we take for granted the easy access to information we have today, doesn't it? Just imagine having to wait for a traveling reader to get your news. You've witnessed the quiet revolution of the printing press, the meticulous work of the scribe, and the vibrant life of the ballad seller. We've journeyed through the bizarre, the dangerous, and the utterly essential jobs of the Renaissance, from the depths of latrine pits to the heights of royal courts. Now, as the soft glow of our imaginary candle begins to wane, let's reflect on how these strange professions of the past echo into our present, and how their legacies continue to shape the world you inhabit today. Consider the gong farmer we met at the very beginning. While you certainly don't have a person coming to your house to empty a latrine pit, their legacy lives on in modern sanitation workers, sewage engineers, and wastewater treatment plant operators. These are the unsung heroes who ensure public health and environmental cleanliness on a massive scale. The dirty, vital work of managing waste, once an individual's gruesome task, is now a complex, highly regulated industry, protecting millions from disease. It's a testament to how far we've come, but also a reminder that fundamental needs, no matter how unpleasant, still require dedicated professionals. Without their predecessors, our cities would be very different and much smellier places. Remember the barber surgeon? Their combined roles might seem shocking now, but they represent the very origins of distinct medical and grooming professions. Today, you have highly specialized surgeons in sterile operating rooms, a far cry from a barber shop. Yet, the core need for skilled individuals to mend bodies and maintain personal appearance remains. And think of the humble barber shop or hair salon, the direct descendants of the grooming aspect of that Renaissance role, now thankfully detached from the bloodletting. This mainstream historical fact, the separation of surgery from barbering, marks a crucial step in the professionalization of medicine. The alchemists, with their mystical quest for gold and elixirs, were the forebears of modern chemists, pharmacists, and even material scientists. Their relentless experimentation, however misguided their ultimate goals, laid the groundwork for understanding chemical reactions and properties. Every time you take a prescribed medication or marvel at a new synthetic material, you're witnessing the distant legacy of those fume-filled Renaissance laboratories and their often eccentric occupants. They literally paved the way for modern pharmaceutical companies, even if they never quite figured out how to turn iron into gold. And the sin eater, a truly quirky and unsettling profession. While we no longer have individuals literally consuming sins, the concept resonates in various forms of psychological support, spiritual guidance, and even community rituals for grief and mourning. The underlying human need to process guilt, find absolution, and release burdens for the deceased or their loved one still exists, albeit expressed through vastly different and hopefully less literal means. Perhaps a therapist, in a way, eats the metaphorical sins or burdens of their clients. The town crier, with their booming voice and vital news delivery, might seem utterly obsolete, but their spirit lives on in every news anchor, every podcast host, every social media influencer, and every notification ping on your phone. The fundamental job of disseminating information quickly and widely, albeit through radically different technologies, is a direct continuation of the town crier's daily grind. They were the original social media, but with way more shouting and far less scrolling. Consider the goldsmiths who acted as early bankers. Their dual role in crafting beauty and managing wealth evolved into distinct professions. Today, you have jewelers who specialize in artistry and bankers who manage your money, credit, and investments. The trust placed in those Renaissance goldsmiths laid the groundwork for the modern financial system, built on confidence and the careful handling of assets. They literally minted the idea of banking. Even the resurrectionists, those grim body snatchers, played an unwitting role in the advancement of medical science. Their illicit activities, born of necessity due to legal restrictions on cadaver acquisition, indirectly fueled anatomical study. This eventually led to a greater understanding of the human body and, eventually, to more ethical means of obtaining specimens. It's a dark legacy, but one that highlights how desperate needs can drive innovation, even through morally questionable paths. The innkeepers of the Renaissance were the distant ancestors of today's massive hospitality industry. Every hotel manager, every Airbnb host, every restaurateur owes a debt to those weary travelers and resourceful innkeepers who provided essential shelter and sustenance. The core business of providing comfort, food, and a temporary home for those on the move has only expanded and professionalized over the centuries. And finally, the printers and typesetters. Their impact is arguably the most profound. Every book you read, every website you browse, every digital text you consume is a direct descendant of Gutenberg's revolution. Their painstaking work laid the foundation for mass communication, widespread literacy, and the democratization of knowledge. They didn't just print books. They printed the future, ushering in an era where information was no longer solely the domain of the elite. You are reading the script right now thanks to their legacy. The global reach of information, a defining characteristic of our modern age, flows directly from their Renaissance workshops. As we bring tonight's journey to a close, let these peculiar roles linger in your mind. They were jobs born of necessity, of societal structures, of a world that was both simpler and infinitely more complex than our own. They remind us that human ingenuity, desperation, and adaptation have always found a way to create a livelihood, no matter how strange or challenging the circumstances. The Renaissance was a vibrant, often harsh, but endlessly fascinating period, and the people who filled these bizarre jobs were the true architects of its daily reality. The air in your room is still. The fan whispers softly, a gentle hum fading into the quiet. Let the images of gong farmers, sin eaters, and massed plague doctors gently recede, replaced by the comforting darkness. Feel the warmth of your covers, the softness of your pillow, The echoes of the past can be thrilling, but the calm of the present is always here. Allow your thoughts to drift, to soften, as the day's last light outside your window gives way to the deep, embracing night. Your journey through the Renaissance is complete, and now it's time to rest.